Hey, Jez.
It's a big news week, Jules.
We've got so much to talk about.
So much.
And then we get the news, Taylor Swift's engaged.
You are so taken by this story, along with half the planet right now. And it's kind of a feel-good thing right now, isn't it?
Millions and millions of people have listened to her music, listened to her lament about love, about trying to find love and the right person. And we've watched kind of men in her life struggle with her talent and her success. And then she finds someone who gets it and gets her, and there's just something kind of joyful about it. But I think we're going to talk about that in a little while, Jez. We're going to discuss a few things today, one of which, Jez, is the fact that we've both been travelling, and yet at the same time it feels like many parts of the world are groaning with tourists and the impact, a lot of hostility from locals. Where do we go? Should we change the way we travel? Like, what's going to shift now? Because there's a lot of eruptions of anger about this.
But first, Jules, I want to talk about Iran and some extraordinary developments on the foreign policy front, because Iran's ambassador has now been kicked out of Australia after the discovery of evidence that the Iranian regime has been involved in anti-Semitic attacks on Australian soil. This is a red line that's been crossed with the discovery of this evidence. And
it's huge.
It's absolutely massive.
Hasn't happened for decades.
Since World War II.
Called persona non grata, and you're out.
And we've spoken about this on the show before, that Iran's role in the unrest in the Middle East is massive. Yep. Not just in Gaza and the West Bank, but also in Lebanon, in Yemen, and now in Australia. These attacks, there was a cafe in Bondi, a Jewish-owned business that was vandalised, a synagogue in Melbourne that was firebombed, and police have been investigating this for some months now. And all of a sudden, earlier this week, there was some whispers in Canberra that there was going to be a significant announcement. And then the Prime Minister stood up yesterday on Tuesday to say that there was now evidence, credible evidence, that at least 2 attacks could be traced to the Iranian regime.
It's interesting too. I think a lot of people are like, well, why did it take so long? And it took, what, seven months or so, as you've said. But they're saying there's criminal activity offshore, then a series of cutouts, a series of intermediaries who've passed information on and on and on to people who are willing to carry these acts out here.
And being paid in cryptocurrency as well, right? So this idea that, all these relationships are untraceable, but of course ASIO has been onto this and looking out for signs of this. Now, it's important to say too that in response and in preparation for this, Australian embassy staff in Tehran have been pulled out for their safety, and Australians in Iran are being told to get out of there because the government's capacity here to assist Australians who are still there will be significantly diminished by this basically cutting off contact between the two countries.
Penny Wong saying just basically don't travel to Iran. Could not have been clearer about that. And then there's another question, isn't there, Jez, about how the Iran Revolutionary Guard Corps is defined in Australia.
So the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps is this elite unit of the Iranian military, and they've been responsible for suppressing dissent in Iran, also going after targets overseas. And, kind of seeding unrest in places like Lebanon with Hezbollah, in Gaza with Hamas, sending directly aid and funding to these organizations. And with the express intent of removing Israel from the map. This is something that they've said explicitly. They don't believe in the existence of Israel, and they've taken this war, this ideology, overseas as well. So in some ways, it shouldn't be a surprise that Iran's willingness to flex its influence overseas has reached Australian shores.
Yeah, that's what I wanted to talk about in terms of the element of surprise, because if you go back through some of the things that the Iranian ambassador has said, and the Australian government has pulled him into line for this, they're pretty strident on Israel. And we should also say, when we're talking about the Iran Revolutionary Guard, is that this is effectively the regime there.
Yeah.
This is effectively the government there, which is why the Australian government has been loath to call it a terrorist organisation.
Even though they've been under pressure to do so, the government here has been seen to be almost a bit too tolerant.
Right. Because they
the
wanted to
Iranian
keep the channel of
Revolutionary
communications open, but
Yep.
now they say the line has been stepped. Now let's go back through the Iranian ambassador's statement. So October 28, so not that long after October 7 in 2023, said, "Welcome to the quagmire. Say hello to your end, Israel." And then recently he was rebuked after he used social media to call Israel a Zionist plague. He called Hamas' commitment to wipe out Israel as a heavenly and divine promise. He was called back again to Australian officials who rebuked him for labelling Hezbollah's assassinated leader as a blessed martyr and lashing out at what he labelled the vile entity of the Zionist regime.
Oh, extraordinary comments to say out loud.
Yeah, in a
diplomatic setting,
circle.
in a foreign country that is grappling with its own, kind of social cohesion issues as they are around the world.
But that's the crucial phrase here, social cohesion, that was used yesterday by the government and the head of ASIO. The sense that we know that Iran has been trying to quash dissidents in other countries, but to actually try to tear at the social fabric, I think was a phrase they used, by whipping up anti-Semitism is something that actually is unique.
Do you know Kylie Moore-Gilbert, who was an academic who was working in Iran? She was arrested a few years ago and accused of being a spy. She was held in one of the most notorious jails in the world, Evin Prison. And she's written a piece for 9 newspapers saying she was not surprised by these developments this week, that Iran's ambassador was expelled. She's been one of these people who's been calling for the government to take a harder line against the Iranian regime and the presence of the Iranian ambassador in Australia and his comments. But she says that when she was jailed, she was shown the names and addresses of Australian synagogues and asked if she had been there, what was in these synagogues. So this has been something that the Iranian regime has been investigating for some time. They want to know what the targets were in Australia and whether she had any knowledge of them.
Yeah, and she made, even though she refused to cooperate with them, she made the Australian government aware of this line of questioning when she got back. It's funny because it reminded me of, so a couple of weeks ago, the Daily Mail published a list of the most successful Jewish people around Sydney, in a way that to me was so shocking, identifying, labelling people who have influence or status or notoriety that are part of the Jewish community, many of whom already have security because they've received threats or they're worried about anti-Semitic attacks. And then this media publication actually prepares a list.
And this wasn't in direct relation to its coverage of the war in Gaza, right? This was completely separate, almost like a celebrity
we've
list.
done socialites before and the most influential this and the most influential that.
But in this social context,
yeah.
Such a bad move and such a betrayal of the social responsibility of journalism. And those people have been rightly feeling quite afraid given the spate of attacks we've seen right around Australia.
Well, it was also you could, reference to the places that they worked, the environments that they kind of lived in.
What their businesses were, their families.
And again, all of which could be found. But there was something about the compiling of it that really showed a profound ignorance of the pressure that a lot of Jewish people are under in Australia and the imminent threat that they feel. And I was hosting Media Watch at the time, and we discussed it on there and spoke to some people who were on the list who all spoke about a concern for their children and a sense that should they go and pick up a yellow star somewhere, there's just this sense of imminent threat. So for Iran to be playing into what is already a very live issue in Australia is deeply concerning.
And we know there are security agencies elsewhere in the world as well who are now watching this because these very similar attacks, anti-Semitic attacks, have been taking place in other countries.
Yeah.
They haven't yet been traced to Iran, but the pattern of behaviour, as Kylie Moore-Gilbert suggests, would point to some kind of Iranian involvement directly traceable to the regime. So I think a lot of security agencies around the world are looking at what we've done here.
Yeah, so there are a few things to keep an eye on from now on, right? It's the reactions in other countries, the potential sharing of information, which I suppose we'll never really fully find out about. What what Iran will do in retaliation here, whether other countries will follow suit in terms of calling the Iran Revolutionary Guard Corps a terrorist organisation, and also what that might mean for some of the Iranian community in Australia who, as Kylie Moore-Gilbert says, have been feeling this strain and pressure of surveillance for quite some time. Jez, let's talk about travel now. We've both been travelling lately. Have you had a moment when you've been on the road and you've looked around and thought there are way too many people here?
I have, and I kind of look around at locals and go, are you okay with us being here?
And they're like, no.
Do you know how when you're overseas and you hear an Australian accent and it's
yeah.
almost cut glass? Like It's just so sharp in a foreign context. And I kind of think, I don't quite know what to do here because I'm part of the problem. I am here in a foreign country, crowding your space. My aunt used to say to me, you know, when you go to another country, behave like a guest.
Yes.
Never forget that. Even when you're a migrant, behave like a guest. And it's about that kind of sense of social responsibility to the place you're in.
Yes.
But we're seeing lots of locals around the world kind of reacting to this now. The influx of foreigners either kind of living part-time in a place or just visiting and kind of trashing the culture of it.
Yeah, just last night I was looking at an ad for Amsterdam and it was saying, don't come here and get trashed. And it showed a
Which is what
guy,
it's known for, right?
a guy like smashing bottles, getting really drunk, getting arrested, being taken away to a cell. And at the end, if it's like, they said at the end, if you come here to get trashed, stay away. I think that you raise a really interesting question, which is there are so many things to be done about this over-tourism or the concentration of tourists in particular spots. And I think there's a bunch of challenges for local governments and different jurisdictions. But then the question is, like, what do travellers do? What do we do? What do you do if you love travel? How can you behave in the right way and respectfully in those circumstances? So I want to talk about that. But, Jez, I mean, Europe has been a hot destination. I believe, like, even since COVID, the number of people going to Europe has...
Oh, that explosion after lockdown lifted. Like,
right? And suddenly everyone was in Italy or something.
Anyone else here? Am I broadcasting to anyone or is it just me? Just everyone seemed to be in Europe.
Right. The hotspots are Barcelona, Paris, Venice, Rome. There's an article for CNN Travel. There was an English teacher and professor. He said he lives near the Sagrada Familia, and he said we've always had tourism and mass tourism, but in the last 10 to 15 years there's been a dramatic change. It is no longer seasonal. It is 365 days a year, and the visitors are much more than the number of inhabitants.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because these are places that have courted tourism. They've built significant economies around visitors coming at certain times of the year. So what do you think has changed then from having courted tourism to now having locals going, no, stay away.
Well, it's the sheer numbers. It's the housing prices have gone up. Airbnbs have left a lot of places available only for tourists. They say live like a local, but it's often owned by a conglomerate that owns 200 apartments, around the city. It pushes people further and further out, and the prices are just significantly hiked for everyone. And I think that's what's creating a lot of problems. So people who've grown up in cities can no longer live in it or no longer recognise it. I think that's tough.
I mean, talk about prices. You remember when Jeff Bezos and Lauren Sanchez got married in Venice in June? And what was that? Somewhere between $47 and $56 million spent on this wedding, where they basically hired out Venice. And the locals were absolutely furious. And they had signs saying, if you can rent Venice for your wedding, you can pay more tax. That was one banner in St. Mark's Square.
Yeah, I remember
More
that.
than 90 private jets, celebrities, politicians all showing up for this big showpiece of a wedding. Meanwhile, locals are struggling under the weight of tourism and the unaffordability of living in the place.
And climate.
And while their whole city is basically sinking into the ocean by 2 millimetres a year.
Yeah. It's very real. I mean, in Barcelona and certain cities, there have been large protests. Again, there's graffiti, tourists go home. And Foreign Correspondent had something on this recently where they talked about Ibiza, a big party island, but also a beautiful natural environment that increasingly people can no longer live for certain parts of the year because their landlords will kick them out. and they'll go and stay with relatives because the landlords can get more money at certain times of the year. And it's kind of shocking when you see people who are teachers or aged care workers living in caravans.
Yeah.
Because they've just been pushed to the outskirts. And certainly everywhere I went, I was talking to people about the high rents, the conflicted nature of we need tourism and we rely on it, but yet it's creating this unsustainable situation.
And there are some economies in the world, like, particularly in developing countries. I've just been in Asia, I've just come back. And these are significant economies that rely heavily on tourism. So we saw, like, immediately after COVID, places like Thailand, Indonesia really struggling because these significant industries, are critical to the local economy, and people there can't afford to turn tourists away.
Yeah.
They're critical to people's well-being and livelihoods there. So it's almost that some countries can't afford to turn the tourists away, even though they're significantly changing the local culture.
True, but a lot of those countries are actually bellwethers. They're examples of how, if you do not manage tourism well early on, it can be an environmental and otherwise catastrophe for people living there, even though you need the money. And that once you begin to sense the strain, you need to bring in a series of things that will even just protect the oceans and protect the land and protect the whole area that you're living and working in.
Exactly. So they did this in Thailand, right? You remember the movie The Beach, Leonardo DiCaprio?
Yeah.
And there was this, it was set in this kind of famous cove in Thailand,
That's right,
Maya Bay. And the pictures are absolutely stunning. It's these soaring kind of mini mountains that just plunge straight into these turquoise waters.
Beautiful.
And it's
Thank
a
you,
bit like
Instagram, for
yeah,
nothing.
Exactly, yeah. But then there were so many tourists there. They had something like, at the peak season, 8,000 people a day visiting this beach. And so you'd get people like swimming out into the coral, stepping on the coral, breaking the coral, sunscreen contamination of the ocean, plastics, boat propellers just whipping up the seabed. And the damage was so bad.
Anchors dragging across,
So the damage was so bad that they ended up with 8% coverage of the original reef.
I did not
and they
know this.
Basically,
8%?
8%. It was horrific. And so the Thai government basically decided to shut it down and say, we can't do this anymore.
It's to regenerate.
And the local tourism operators, understandably, very upset by this because, again, this was their livelihood.
But there won't be anything to show them.
Exactly. So what they did was they did rehab. They kind of, got scientists to replant reefs. And, replanting a reef is not easy because you seed these reefs and they don't necessarily just grow back. You might get like a 50% success rate at best. But they shut that whole area down, and they've only kind of, over the last few years started to reopen it, but only seasonally. And then there are times of the year when they shut it off completely and let the area rehabilitate. I wonder if that's the future of these over-visited places.
Yes.
That there are times of the year when a place is just closed.
You just can't go.
Yeah.
Wouldn't it be great if they got to it when there was 80% of the reef still left? Do you know what I mean? When you can actually say, no, wait a minute, we need to think ahead a little bit, and it's not just all about making money. Like, that's a very short-term issue here. But, I was interested. I was looking, I was trying to think about the fact that there's so many Australians travelling now. There has been a reduction in fuel prices for, which has impacted air travel. But also there was a bounce back after COVID. But I was looking on Reddit, that great source of information, but they have these obviously good charts on there. And push factors were interesting. People were saying, look, people have given up on buying a house. So I've seen a trend of people going overseas at the end of a lease before coming back and finding somewhere else to rent.
Holy moly.
Someone else saying there's that two-speed economy at work again. The haves are having a great time and pushing inflation, and the have-nots are more marginalised and numerous. Someone else, it's cheaper to fly from Sydney to Japan than fly to Perth. Oh, this was news to me. I remember during the Queensland storms last year when people's houses were flooded, people were going to Bali for a week or two because it was cheaper than trying to find emergency accommodation during peak season.
Do you know, can I just say, it's the same out of Perth, that it's easier to go to Perth, from Perth to Bali and Southeast Asia than it is to go to the eastern seaboard of Australia. Like, our kind of map is just insane with what's affordable and what's easy to get to.
Right. And other people saying, look, everyone young has looked at the housing situation and said, I guess I'm living with my parents forever. No need to save for a deposit. Might as well bog off overseas.
I'm planning a holiday at the end of the year to one of Australia's favourite holiday destinations, Japan.
Yes.
And I went to the travel agent and I said, I'm going during low season because it'll be like freezing cold. And he goes, oh, no, there's no low season in Japan. the whole year is just booked out. So he said, if you want to buy a ticket, if you want to book accommodation, do it now, because pretty much the whole year is peak season, which was mind-blowing to me because I was like going,
Yeah.
I'm part of the problem here.
Yeah, I know. But that is the great conundrum, and that is the trickiness about that kind of wrestling with that guilt when you're actually on the road. So, but when we look at where Australians travel, top 10 destinations, this is up to June 2024. Number 1, Indonesia.
Yep.
Number 2, New Zealand, 1.3 million.
Checks out.
Number 3 was USA at 714,000.
I wonder how that's going to change. We'll have to keep an eye on that one. Yeah, yeah.
Without a doubt, that will change. Japan, 700. Then UK, Thailand, China, India, Fiji, and Vietnam. Before we get to solutions, I want to talk about this list which was on Fodor. 15 destinations to reconsider in 2025, and they just list now places that you really should think about before you go.
Uh-oh.
I've probably been to half of them.
I might be having a staycation after this chat.
Okay, Bali, Indonesia. Rapid unchecked development spurred by over-tourism is encroaching on Bali's natural habitats, eroding its environmental and cultural heritage and creating a plastic apocalypse. Okay, that is a worry. And again, yes, tourists need to stay away, be careful about when they go, but the local government obviously needs to be regulating things. Mount Everest.
No way.
There are so many people on there. There's so much
Really?
rubbish. Yes.
That does not sound like a holiday.
And people dying on that trip, and
it's like littered with bodies.
Bodies and rubbish. We'll go back to the Europeans. So they have a headline: European destinations where locals don't want you. Okay, and it's Barcelona, Mallorca, Canary Islands, Venice. There's a long list there. So I think, look, a lot of it's about the cost of living. They estimate 60% of dwellings in Lisbon are vacation accommodations.
Holy moly.
And they're just trying to bring in legislation now to make it harder for tourists to move in there. We were in Ericeira, which is about an hour out of Lisbon, and there's one part of Ericeira that they just call the New America because so many Americans have migrated there.
Wow.
So it's kind of wild, but again, the number one problem is the cost of everything and the people getting pushed out of housing. So the question for us, Jez, is what are the solutions for it?
I reckon, look, I want to give a shout out here to the Mundi Mundi Bash, which is festival that takes place in the middle of the desert near the border between South Australia and New South Wales. It happens every year. This year, 15,000 people go along, and basically it's a music, cultural festival, very strong connection to Indigenous country, language and song. And it's really interesting that as a festival, it's actually on the up and up, considering how festivals in Australia are on the down and down, not doing so well. This one attracts a lot of interest. And Giselle Buetti, writing for The Australian now, just a disclosure, Giselle was a guest of the Mundi Mundi Bash and went to report on this. But this rings true for me. She writes that at a time when Australia's live music scene is facing a crisis, triggering a collapse of major festivals, this gig near Broken Hill in New South Wales has tapped into a deeper cultural yearning, proving that Australians are willing to spend and engage with experiences they deem highly valuable. In other words, you go and engage with the local culture, the local people, and you celebrate the place and what it represents.
Which is what travelling should be about, learning from other people,
Exactly.
Your mind expanded,
Yeah.
like by art, different cultural practices, the joy of the siesta, for example. Why don't we have more siestas here? And just getting out of your own prejudices, your own blinkers that you have from living in one particular place. It's a fantastic thing to do.
It's great.
How do we do it without destroying the planet? And it's great when it works. So, I mean, there's all kinds of solutions that are being touted, and I think that local governments really need to be looking at, the situation with short-term rental accommodation and regulating Airbnb sufficiently so that cities don't get hollowed out. And so dramatically changed. They're looking at capping numbers. They could look at capping the numbers that come off cruise ships because people don't spend that much money when they come off the cruise ships. They will flood a city, but they've probably eaten and they'll definitely be sleeping back on the cruise ship. So those kinds of things. In Japan, for example, the foreign rail passes for the Shinkansen have become more and more expensive.
They've doubled in price, so it's not actually that cheap now to get around.
No.
Or not as cheap as it used to be.
Yeah, and there are tourist taxes. They'll probably be raised in certain places. There are guidelines on how people should behave. They've been coming up with those in Tokyo as well, just to make people respectful of locals and the environments. We've all seen those clips of women like tripping over themselves to get right up in the faces of geisha, for example. Just really disrespectful stuff. I think city planning and zoning is crucial. But also, are we going to how will cities advertise themselves? Do you advertise just at peak time or at a certain point of year? Apparently, part of the problem is what they call the Ryanair revolution. So you go between European destinations for almost nothing. So once you are in Amsterdam, you can head off to Belgium, then you go to Paris, then you go. And a lot of people travel between a lot of different things, and people recommend actually to stay in one place for a good period of time.
Right, so don't do the smash and grab.
Don't do the smash and grab.
Yeah.
Yeah, and kind of soak up a culture a little bit. I actually kind of prefer that than going from place to place to place. And I do think Instagram's created a grab and a click and run kind of vibe and mentality. I was reading something that was said by a lecturer in tourism management at the University of South Australia, and she said, don't be a jerk. That is just the fundamental principle. Like you said, exactly what you said.
If you're going to be a visitor, act like one.
She says you're a visitor in somebody's home, and that's the thing about these destinations that we forget. These are local people's homes. Visitors think they have a right to go to places, that their money buys them access, and they don't need to be thoughtful and sensitive, and that's completely wrong. I would love to hear from any of the smarties who've been travelling lately, who've seen people do it right. Like, what are ways in which you can travel right and carefully and respectfully? How do we avoid adding to that burden while still occasionally being able to travel?
That's a good call, Jules. You can email us at notstupid@abc.net.au.
Picks of the week, and I believe you have one for me,
Well,
Fernando.
I do. I want to look. Might be a bit self-indulgent.
Go on.
But this is about me and my travels
Please.
lately. I've been back to Malaysia, where I was born. So this was part of a trip facilitated by DFAT. So this was a work trip. The Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade invited me to go along to Malaysia. This was supported by the ABC.
And you were giving lectures.
I was giving university lectures and kind of doing meet and greets with industry over there, media industry, and just speaking about how we think about public broadcasting and the importance of media, a free and open media, in a democratic society. It wasn't about sort of going there and telling them how to be more like Australia, but it was an opportunity for me to learn as well, and just, you know, it made me so proud to be Australian in a way that I think, you know, I called friends back home and I was saying, you know, people in Thailand and Malaysia are really interested in Australia's role in the region, how we do things. There are so many shared concerns, particularly in the media industry, around disinformation, misinformation, the fragmentation of audiences, the impact of social media on young people. So I feel like we almost kind of struck up this brotherhood, sisterhood of shared issues and problems that we all just kind of want to live in a better world, to be free and informed societies. And media over there, they're so awake and alive to different models of doing things. And
so what made you proud to be Australian?
I think it was just this idea that people look up to Australia. And, you know, being a Malaysian-born boy who went to school there as well, people just sort of expressed this intense pride, particularly when I went back to the town I was born in, Kuala Lumpur.
Because you'd done good.
I'd done good, and they were just so proud. And I had these really profound conversations with family and with a teacher who I went back to visit my old primary school, which I haven't been back to in 30 plus years. And I said to the people I was travelling with, I'm not quite sure these people will remember who I am because it's been so long since I left. And everything's changed. The town's changed. The roads have changed. There's land being reclaimed on the coast to the point that I can't even recognise it. Anyway, I arrived at the school in Kota Kinabalu, Sabah, which is incidentally where Penny Wong is from. So this tiny town has had some good exports. And I walk in and one of my former teachers was still there. And she comes up to me and she goes, Jeremy, it's Claire Buckmewewa. She's a Sri Lankan Malaysian woman who taught me a little bit in primary school, but she remembers me. And her husband was also a teacher at my school, and he taught me a lot. And she said to me, "Do you remember me?" And I said, "Mrs. B, absolutely, I remember you. I remember your children. I remember Mr. Kingsley. I remember being in your classes. I remember how kind you were to me." And I was having this chat with my, a very close friend of mine who's a university lecturer, and she talks about her babies, and she and bear in mind, they're at university. They're not babies. They're actual fully grown adults, but she thinks of them as her babies. And Mrs. B said, she thinks of me as one of her babies. And she gave me this big hug. And the most kind of compelling and moving thing for me was that this conversation that I think I want our listeners to take away, that these grown-ups were saying to me, "I remember who you were. I remember what you were like. I remember that, I was, truthfully, a quiet, shy, softly
Sweet
spoken little
kid.
boy." So it's, a
With
great
rap
irony
dance,
that
breakdancing aspirations.
I've ended up being a TV newsreader, kind of with this
public
voice, and it was just so comforting that, these people identified me with who I was when I was a young kid.
And that's why it's so important.
And it was just like, all the stuff about, coming to Australia, becoming an Australian citizen, being on TV mattered less than them remembering who I was. And it was just so moving, and having these conversations with my aunts, with my cousins, uncles in Malaysia, just the intense pride. And for me, just being so proud to be an Australian in that context and speaking about what I've learnt, being a bicultural product of a family that's moved over several generations across like 4 countries.
Amazing.
It really was just so special. And I
moving,
think I want our listeners to just take away this idea that you know of someone who needs to hear from you how you remember them, how they were when they were young. And how much comfort that might just bring them. Anyway, that's my pick of the week. I've had this really tremendously moving week.
It.
And you won't know this, but I did call Jules during the week and I was telling her about this and I was in floods of tears. And
I was crying too.
It was just so special.
It was beautiful. It was really, really great.
It will not be soon forgotten.
And you are still that boy. I love that idea. And the funny thing is I also had that so when I was in Portugal, I was meeting friends of mine. We met when we were 3.
Yes.
Living in Germany. I'll show you a photo actually. I just found a photo of us at my 5th year birthday party, and Katie's being a complete clown. I was looking quite serious in German Gothic pinafore. I don't know what was going on, and my other friend Lisa was looking cute there as well. But it's so funny that ease you have with people who know who you are always.
What does it do for you to reconnect with the past like that, to a person that you no longer are but that you were?
It's incredible comfort. But for those girls, because they've always been really, really mischievous, and we got up to things together, especially when we're in our teens and our 20s. But I really used to read all the time when I was little, so much so that their mums used to annoy them with what I'd already read when I was So they see me as at some point in a day, I'll have to go off and sit off with my book. And it's true. It sounds strange, doesn't it? But they kind of recognise that other world, living in a world of imagination was really, really important to me there.
They also know how you became a best-selling author.
Oh, I wrote
And I love
too.
that story, right? Yeah. They know you from before you were this.
Yeah, and then you're all somehow still the same people. It's kind of lovely.
All right, pick of the week for you. What's yours?
Look, not quite as profound, not going to lie. But this marriage between Taylor Swift and Travis Kelce, a very well-known footballer who was, still cast into the stratosphere when he started dating Taylor Swift. They put out an Instagram post to 2 of them, had I think 5 photos, and it was something about when your English teacher marries your gym teacher, which is actually how they looked. And they're going to be a slightly weird setting with a lot of photos around it. It's going to be sending people quite wild today. You may remember that in the lead up to the election, there were a lot of conspiracy theories around their relationship. That it was, what was the actual theory? I think it was that it was all a front and it was fake and it was made to somehow embarrass Trump because she had endorsed Kamala Harris and maybe his team, the Chief, was going to win. But whatever, they've been subject to a lot of intense scrutiny. Recently, I think she's been having time off. But there's something I think you always know there's going to be a volcanic reaction to this because she's a mega star. And because there's so many people with parasocial relationships with her because she's sung about heartbreak for so many years.
Is that what it is? That people kind of like don't know her but feel really connected to her?
Really connected.
But I think the thing that people connect with too is that she's so imperfect. Like
and
she's
vulnerable.
slightly awkward.
She's goofy.
And,
When she dances, she's goofy.
Yeah.
And she gets like even someone like her can get treated terribly like by guys. I'm like amazed Jake Gyllenhaal has, can still walk around in public every day with the number of Swift fans that have been singing All Too Well or any songs kind of based on him. And I think that sense of how do guys cope with being with such a famous,
like she's like several main characters in one, right?
And adored woman, like the way she is adored. Like Trump criticizes her every now and then, says that he hates her, he said. Yeah. I mean, which is a very mature and grown-up response to her endorsing Kamala or Harris or saying something like that. But he's actually said she's terrific now, that he's terrific and she's terrific and he's glad they're together. So maybe that's different. But it did get me thinking about the parasocial relationships. I think there's so many things about it. We just become attached to people and we really want them to be okay and we really want them to be loved. I think for women there's a series of interpretations that are quite layered as well. I think some of it is like wanting a powerful woman who's also vulnerable to have that kind of love and have a guy who's fine with that, who's not threatened.
Comfortable playing backup.
Yeah, who in fact loves it and feeds off it as he seems to. He's like, why would I have a problem with her, man? She's great. Look at her. Like, she's great and she's with me.
Do you think, I kind of can't help but draw parallels to Harry and Meghan.
Oh, yeah.
There's the kind of, the kind of wave of support and then almost the coverage will turn against them at some point and try to kind of suggest pressure on the relationship, that there's trouble in paradise, all that kind of thing. Because I see that coming from a media coverage point of view. I can see the time coming when, there are rumours, however ill-placed they might be, about how they're not so happy after all. I wonder if you have thoughts on how they withstand that.
I feel like both of them, particularly Taylor, has withstood so much already. A lot of attacks leading up to the election, politically oriented things. I think you just have to learn to inoculate yourself somehow. She's switched off a lot lately. And also, if they actually happen to be genuinely in love, there's your inoculation. Like, you've got a happy marriage. And I think someone like that could easily switch off. But she doesn't need any money. She can continue to create. I think she could move away from it. I also was thinking because there's a woman here called Abby Chatfield in The Bachelor when she went famously, he said, I'm an astrophysicist, and she said, I'm a Gemini. But that was sliced together.
Oh, was it?
That was one of those dodgy edits.
No, I didn't know that.
That's what she says, yes.
Because she's very smart.
Well, it makes her seem like not smart, right?
Yes.
So a lot of attention was paid to her. She was created as a villain and she was very beautiful, but they're like, oh, but she's just conniving. Then she comes out and she is kind of playing this media game and also kind of being herself. She gets a feminist tattoo. She talks about slut shaming on that show. And she's obviously very bright. I had her on the drum as a guest a few times and she's so sharp. So she's out there in the public eye and she gets a lot of trolling and a lot of carry on and all the rest of it. And she was quite prominent in the lead up to the last election. But she's been in a relationship with a singer. He's in a band called Peking Duck, Kelly Holiday. And he just put out a song about her called Dancing Too and about them meeting each other and they were both dancing but at different times in their lives and now they're dancing together. And I saw people responding to this video in this way that was like, oh my God, love still exists. This is so what I want for you. And maybe one day for me too, I could have this in a really unaffected way. And I'm like, firstly, is there something about him in which he's just kind of like this hairy, happy dude who backs his partner? Like, he's not like trying to put her in a box. He's not trying to belittle her, and they're a team.
Yeah.
Or is it also in any era when the New York Times is running pieces about hetero fatalism and hetero pessimism about people struggling to have relationships with guys because they're not all like you, Jez? that, you know, that people flock to success stories and really invest in them and want them to make them work. What do you think?
I love that idea, and I think it's perfectly okay to invest in someone else's joy as a vicarious enjoyment of something that you hope for yourself. I think that's good and hopeful, and in times like these, Jules,
But it also gets weird. Is that what you're about to say?
No. I think in times I'm as you know, I'm perfectly okay with weird.
Yeah.
But in times like these, what a great thing to look up to.
Yeah. Okay. Wow. We're leaving on a positive note.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Very nice to catch up.
You too.
Our producers are Madeline Jenner and Cinnamon Nippard. Thank you for tuning in again. Don't forget you can catch us on ABC iView and YouTube, along with the ABC Listen app.